Greetings, everyone. As you know, I'm Sister Michelle, and today, actually, for this month of January, we're looking at integral ecology. And there's so many aspects to integral ecology, and we're going to hear some of those today. So I would like to introduce to you Matt Celmer, who is our speaker for today. He's the director at Moontree, which is one of our ministries on our mother house properties in the United States. And well, mother house properties, yes. And so Matt is here. He has been immersed in integral ecology and the environment and spirituality because that's what Moontree actually does. That's an aspect of it, as well as the arts and spiritual formation. So we put all that together, and Matt's going to share with us today. Welcome, Matt. We're pleased you're here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Okay. So if you want to share your screen with us, and I will let you know when
Absolutely.
all of us can see it. It's a new feature. They have this little thing that says everyone can see your screen now. Everyone
All
can
right.
see your screen now. All
Awesome.
right, Matt, you take it.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks again, Sister Michelle, for this opportunity to speak. I've been at Moontree now for 6 years, and before I came here, integral ecology or ecology was a foreign language to me. And I got my master's in liberal studies. And I realized through my work here that the liberal studies perspective, which is all about an interdisciplinary mindset, is very appropriate for a lead into integral ecology, especially for those of us that don't think of ourselves as scientific. So this is a framework that I developed through my studies with the Deep Time Network, which is an online community that works with a lot of Montessori educators and other scientists, well-being practitioners, and psychologists with a focus on the universe story. So it's this idea that we have this perspective now of the universe, thanks to science, of God's creation, that this universe has been evolving for 13.6 billion years. And we are right now the final product of that evolution of the universe. And this universe is a constantly changing thing, and it's all connected. So we never historically have had this type of perspective. So to really focus on this perspective and its impact on how we should look at ourselves in the world and our relationship with one another and with the universe itself is a really powerful frame to work through. And I found it very helpful in integral ecology as well. Again, not being an expert in any of these things, scientific or anything ecological, it's really powerful to think about how much we just don't know still and how much we've learned throughout the course of humanity. So as part of this 9-month program, we were asked to create some final product, a final presentation of sorts that kind of reflected our own journey and something that we can apply in practice. So this is the slide that was part of my final that shares this framework I created throughout that course called Decreating Self in a Time of Decay. And that might sound kind of negative, but it's the idea of decay is not necessarily a bad thing, right? We get mushrooms from decay. And for people like mushrooms, mushrooms are really good. But a lot of other things come from decay, like new birth. So sometimes we ask the question, what has to die in order for what to be born? And so we're going through a very transitional time as a global society. And that can be very daunting, can be very anxiety inducing, very stressful. But if we walk through it knowing that there's something coming on the other end, or we're doing this for a reason, there's some journey to go. And the journey for integral ecology is that journey. We're in a very advanced, technologically driven, fast-paced society. And that has a lot of amazing advantages, but there's also a big downside to that. And the downside is that we aren't necessarily living in harmony with the environment or even with one another sometimes. And so this framework was kind of my way of giving myself this task of I need to go through these steps to basically unlearn what I've learned up till now, because if I just continue to do those things that I've been conditioned to do in this 21st century mentality, then I'm just going to perpetuate the same problems that we're in right now. And to expand that socially, if we just keep on doing the same things, we have a pretty good idea of what that picture is going to look like, and it's not necessarily going to be a pretty one. But if we just do a little bit of a reset in how we see the world and how we live in that world, and COVID-19 was an opportunity in many ways for us to do that. Not the greatest one, definitely a very destructive in many ways and stressful one, but there was time to stop, to slow down, to take a step back and reflect and contemplate. And another thing that before I started here that was pretty foreign to me was the idea of contemplative prayer. And I've never been part of that. I've never engaged in that practice until working here. And after a real crash course my first year and a regular practice of centering prayer, I've realized the value of just being still and silent and listening, and how important that is for us to be open to the spirit and to where we need to go next. So this is a little breakthrough. I won't get in too much details into that three-way Venn diagram. I love using those. So Moon Tree focuses on art, nature, and spirituality. And you'll see that those are the three rings there. And that the rebel communication theory was my master's thesis that I had finalized right before getting hired at Moon Tree. And it focused on creativity, active inquiry, and openness as rebellions against social injustice, passivity, and absolutes. And then authentic action, awareness, and letting go are themes from the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which I had just read before taking this course. And I'm like, oh, they align, these threes. So every time I see threes, right? And in Catholic tradition, we know three is a really powerful number, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So I always think, oh, there's something here. We call that synchronicity, right? Seeing connections that may or may not be there, but in our conscious, we're connecting the dots. So the process goes from discontentment to deconstruction, to disillusionment, to dehabituation, to disbelief, to deconditioning. You can also call that decolonization, and then to defragmentation. And these words, the D's are all about the idea of undoing. It's not meant to be a negative thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I'll talk more about that as we go through the slides. Let's see if I can go to the next slide. There we go. So how these slides are laid out is the title will be that process or state that I just listed there in that model. Then we'll have the definition, disposition, and method on your left-hand side. And then on the right, I color-coded themes from the Laudato Si Action Platform goals to go with how this aligns. So we've been doing a lot of work with Laudato Si as well since I started. And I've been on a journey of tying these ideas into hopefully a more digestible concept. And actually, I may have overshot the mark on that because these may sound very philosophical and very abstract. And in some ways, it's intentional because a lot of people can't really engage in some of the scientific or ecological language that is usually put forward in integral ecology conversations. So this is a very liberal arts oriented way to think about it. So for those of you that think of yourselves as artists or think of yourselves as philosophers or just non-scientific and non-artistic, this is supposed to be for the everyday person. And then the Anishinaabe grandfather teachings were something that were shared with me through an artist we've been working with for a stone sculpture project. And the Anishinaabe is the larger umbrella of the Potawatomi, who are the indigenous inhabitants where the mother house in the United States reside. And through some of Thomas Berry's work, and Thomas Berry was a big figure in the Deep Time Network, as well as in Pope Francis's interpretation of integral ecology, from my understanding. And he was a Passionist priest, and he had this idea of a fourfold path of wisdom, that there are four sources of wisdom, and they come from classical religion, women, indigenous, and science. So you all have the classical religion and the women part pretty pat down, I would say. So what I'm trying to bring to this is a little bit of that indigenous wisdom from the Anishinaabe peoples, and then also a little bit of the science from, again, a liberal studies perspective on science, which is how does the scientific knowledge translate into our everyday lives. And then also, before I started working here, I worked for the Red Cross. And so the humanitarian principles of International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies was really important about how we serve people. And I found those very helpful in my approach to ministry work here as well. And so I'm going to share those because many of you are involved in ministry work. And this is a way to kind of put ourselves in a frame of mind for how we can serve others with this new integral ecology lens that we put on. And then at the bottom will be a quote from Jiddu Krishnamurti, who was an Indian philosopher that has been very instrumental in my spiritual growth and development through my time here at Moontree. So we start with discontentment. So we have to start with this state of not being satisfied. There's a sense of grievance, a restless aspiration for improvement. So if we read Laudato Si, we can very easily make that leap to a state of discontentment, right? Something is not right. And those of us that are in nonprofit and ministry work, we understand, okay, the status quo is not good. So we are discontent and we're wanting to change that. We want to feed the hungry. We want to clothe the naked, right? We want to heal the sick. And so we're discontent that there is a state where these problems exist. And that discontent doesn't need to be a place of anger necessarily. There is a desire to change and to fix, but that also there can be gratitude. So for me as a white man, I can still be grateful for the privileges that I've been afforded in my life that have given me opportunities that others didn't have access to, while also being discontent that those privileges aren't equally extended to all people, right? And so the idea here is that we need to be open, openness to the spirit, have an open heart and an open mind to be able to see what others are experiencing, right? It's very easy for white men sometimes to not see through the lens of a person of color or of a woman. And there's a lot of guilt and fear to go into that. But if we can be open to another person's authentic, real life experience, it's going to open our eyes and we're going to find out that, oh, there's a lot of things that I would like to fix about how we structure our society, how we live in relationship with one another. And then in the framework of integral ecology, how we live in relationship with the world. So what's going on? And how we find out what's going on is by talking to others. So this ties with the Laudato Si action platform goal of response to the cry of the poor. So if we want to serve the poor, if we want to respond to the cries, we have to hear them, right? We have to listen to them. We have to understand why they're suffering and how we can solve some of these very deeply entrenched systemic problems that create this scenario. And from the Anishinaabe teaching, it's the idea of respect. Right? We need to respect those that we serve, those that we deem as less fortunate than ourselves, which is why the Poor Handmaids are such a beautiful community, because the desire to be among the poor, to be poor yourselves, is such an awesome way to really immerse yourself into the service for those, because you show that you respect them. They haven't lost human dignity because they are struggling economically, right? That they deserve just as much respect as anybody else. And then voluntary service. All of you as sisters hopefully joined the order voluntarily, right? That you chose to do this. We can't force people to engage in this work. It has to be chosen, because if it's forced, it's going to end up being inauthentic or it's going to fall flat. So we have to have that free will component to freely choose to do this work. So then once we've gone into that discontentment, right, that's a lot. So I'm going to just take a second to absorb that. Then we go into the step of, okay, so we've looked into what's going on. There's stuff going on that we're not happy with. So we're discontent about it. So the next step is to deconstruct what is going on. Why are these things happening? And we go through this by doing a process of active inquiry. We have to actively inquire and look into the world. Another book that I've used is Ever-Present Origin by a Polish philosopher named Jean Gebser. And he talks about the 5 structures of consciousness, which range from archaic and early man to magic to mythic to mental, where we're at now in evolution. And the next step is the integral. So this idea of integral being a big part of the terminology, I think that influenced Pope Francis, it's really about the interconnectivity of all living things and non-living things. And so in the integral consciousness for us as humans, we're seeing through all of humanity with this very powerful lens now that we have where everybody who has a cell phone and the internet has access to more information than the most powerful empires combined throughout human history. And that's a pretty awesome, but also a very daunting responsibility to have, right? And
Mhm.
so we go into this questioning of why. Why are people suffering in this way? Why did we organize the structure of society in this way? And we talk about the whys of 5. The more you go deeper and deeper, you get a different answer, right? So why is it this way? And keep on going till you get to the root of the problem, hopefully. And so this ties in with the Laudato Si goal of ecological economics. It's pretty clear that unbridled capitalism and extractive economics are very destructive, not just to the environment, but also to people. That the idea of capitalism is about extracting as many resources as possible from an area to maximize profits. So we really need to reimagine how we exchange goods and services economically. And this aligns with Anishinabe's grandfather teaching of honesty, that, I think there's always this, it's pretty clear that we don't necessarily think of people with the most money as being the most honest, right? And sometimes we often find that being dishonest is a good way to increase profits. But if we can be honest about what we're doing and what the needs are, then we can exchange goods and services in a way where it's not about getting an upper hand on somebody so that I can accumulate more wealth than them. It's about a fair, equitable exchange where we both are rejuvenated and regenerated from the exchange, as opposed to one being drained of their resources and the other having an excess of those
Mhm.
resources. And this ties with our Red Cross principle of neutrality, that it's not about, oh, me and I'm on my me team and I'm going to get as much money and as many resources as I can. It's about being neutral. It's about being on an even playing field and not picking sides, not trying to prioritize my group over your group or my religion over your religion. And that neutrality sometimes is a lot more difficult than it sounds, but it takes an intentional effort of being objective and open and fair. And then we move on to disillusionment. So once we've deconstructed the problems or deconstructed the causes of why we're here, where we're at, and we can go through this in a number of ways, but then we get to a state where we're no longer in a state of illusion about the reality of the world around us. So hopefully now we're awake to what's happening. And so there's this, the definition is about being dissatisfied or defeated in expectation of hope and to free from illusion. So I like to say it's a positive thing to be disillusioned because you're seeing the world as it is. It's not necessarily a negative thing, but it is difficult because illusions often are better, make us feel better, right? So I
Mhm.
think about like a magician. We know that the magic trick isn't real, and when we lose that sense of magic, we don't have as much fun watching magicians anymore, right? But it's this idea that we know that we're now seeing reality for it is. We're not being deceived. And this ties in with ecological education, that we need to be able to have an a disillusioned view of the ecosystems that we're part of, as opposed to an illusion that, oh, we can just take as much as we want and everything's going to be fine. That's the illusion. No, we need to realize that we have to be more sustainable and regenerative with our practices. And that goes into truth. That's just what is, right? Not what we want it to be or what we hope it is. It's what is it. And then this ties in with universality, that what the suffering that we experience in our own individual lives is part of our shared consciousness as humans. We all experience the same type of suffering, the same type of fears, the same type of struggles, granted in different contexts, but we share in that. And the more that we carry those burdens together, the more we can empower the individual. And so then we move on to de-habituation when we realized, okay, so I now see things as they are. I'm no longer under an illusion about what's going on. I realize there's a problem. Right? Pope Francis said, hey, there's a problem. Let's try and fix it. So now how do we de-habituate ourselves? How do we break down our current habits that can be destructive and build more positive ones? And this ties in with the adoption of sustainable lifestyles that the Laudato Si Action platform calls for. And this is probably the most difficult part, because it's so easy to fall into habits or routines, because then we don't have to think about it. We don't have to put energy into it, right? We just go through the motions. But that's what we need to try and step back from and go into the state of intentionality. And I came up with this idea that I introduced to my students of do something you normally don't do. Don't do something you normally do, and then one random act of kindness. And if you could do those three things one day, you could help dehabituate yourself a little bit at a time. And then this quote from Christian Murray I thought was good, because it says, habit implies repetitive action which arises from not being aware. Following routine, however effective or necessary it may be in daily life, generally leads to a mechanical way of living. One can do the same thing at the same hour every day without it becoming a habit. Where there is an awareness of what is being done, attention dispels habit. And I think about you as sisters and your habits and routines of prayer, that they're not mechanical, because there is an awareness and intentionality behind it. And that's what's so beautiful. It's not doing the same thing over and over just because you're lazy or because it's easy. It's because you're intentionally opening yourself up to the Spirit. And being open to the Spirit is also an intentional place, an intentional disposition that we have to continue to return to, because it's very easy for my ego, right, to get in the way and say, no, I don't want to be open right now. I want to do what I want to do. And so it takes a little bit of bravery in doing that. Bravery that I trust in the Spirit, that by being open, being vulnerable, that I'm going to still flourish and help others flourish with me. And this idea of independence, of being truly independent, not being a prisoner of your own habits or a prisoner of the habits that the 21st century um, um, fast-paced world can do to you, right? We can look at our phones. We can end up looking at our phones for 5 hours in a day and not even realize it, just because it's such an important tool. So it's not that we don't need to use those things, but we need to just be intentional about how we use these tools. So then we move into the state of disbelief. And now for those of us in religious communities, that also might be a challenging notion, this idea of not believing in the things we believed our entire lives, or the things that we've devoted our lives to. It's the state of, if I have faith, I can let go of my beliefs if my beliefs get in the way of my seeing humanity in others, or my seeing the world as it is. And that doesn't mean that you have to stop practicing Catholicism, Christianity, or whatever your religious tradition is, but it means that you embrace the letting go of it to see through the perspective of others that don't share that same belief. And also this idea that we don't necessarily what's going on, right? We don't know the will of God. We don't know what the future may hold for us, right? We might have ideas and we might be close, right? But we have to have a state of openness. If we feel like it's closed, if we have the answers, we don't need to be open to what the Spirit might be sending us. And if we can be open, right, which is a state of vulnerability, then we can receive things in a new way. And so this community resilience and empowerment as a Laodicea Sea Action Platform goal, that communities that we're nested within are not going to share our beliefs, right? Even individual beliefs, even if we think that everybody in our community shares the same religious tradition or the same race or the same gender even, there's still going to be a lot of diversity in there. So for us to be resilient and to empower one another, we need to be open to the beliefs, the worldviews, bless you, and the
Thank you.
realities of others that aren't there, right? So see, that's the thing. I could have been talking. If I'm so focused on talking, I don't want to be polite and say bless you, right? But this idea of humility too, that we're just that our faith is a powerful tool, but if it's faith that is inferred as knowledge, right? That I absolutely know everything. I absolutely know these things. I absolutely know, instead of saying, I believe in these things, right? And bless you again. And the
Thank you.
humility to say that we just don't know, and it's okay. And then also to humanity, that sometimes belief systems historically have gotten in the way of our seeing humanity in others, right? We know that through the process of colonization, a lot of Christian missionaries were seeing people who weren't practicing Christianity as less than human. And we know that's just not right. So we need to prioritize seeing humanity and let everything else flow from there. And then so once we get to that place of, okay, I can let go of the things that I think that I know, because the things that I thought that I know were based on something that I didn't understand, right? Were based maybe on a state of reality that I didn't see. So now I realize that I've been conditioned my whole life based on the educational systems, right? That these forces, these systems built to perpetuate their own existence. So as an example, being um, born and raised Catholic, I realized that there's conditioning that happened in my life to be Catholic, right? So I have a natural proclivity to believe the Catholic tradition, and that's not a good nor bad thing, but a recognition of that allows me to objectively analyze my beliefs, as opposed to saying, well, this is just what I believed my whole life. And I always think about the gospel line about being lukewarm. It's the idea of like you can't just be lukewarm and just go in the flow. You need to unpack all of those things that you've been taught your whole life and unlearn everything and re-challenge it and revisit it. And what happens in that process is, yeah, there's going to be some things that you let go of, and there's going to be some things that you affirm. And so that's, again, the idea of like, it's not all bad, it's not all garbage. What has a place in this time? What has a place in integral ecology, in my being interconnected with the world around me? And what is driving a wedge between me and my relationship with others, between me and my relationship with the natural world? And this idea of observing without an image, that we need to let go of our image of ourselves, let go of our image of others, let go of our image of this amazing planet. And when we do, we have this childlike innocence where we see ourselves, we see others, and we see the living world around us as something new and beautiful that is beyond description, it's beyond naming. And it's this very exciting, very fresh way of seeing things. But if we're holding on to that image, then we see the image first. And that becomes a lens, and it almost can be blinders that doesn't enable us to actually see what's really going on, what's really out there, seeing ourselves as we really are and others as they really are. And this is that response to the cry of the earth. We have to let go of our image of the earth as something that's just here to serve us. If we understand that we're actually part of this earth and we're part of a global organism where we're all connected, there's a lot more beauty and a lot more understanding of that interconnectivity. And this is love. When we love one another, we're saying, yeah, your life is important to me. I'm tied to you because I love you. And if we love the earth, we're tied to it, that its suffering is our suffering, and our suffering is its suffering. And then the Red Cross principle of impartiality, that, yeah, it's not, we have agendas, we have lives that we have to do, but we need to be impartial in the sense that we have to serve equitably all those around us. And those include some of the lowest creatures that we've taken for granted, right? Those animals that we eat, right? Are we causing undue suffering in how we process meat? And in the United States, yes, we definitely are. We can do this in a more humane way. And the sisters on the farm at Ancilla, right? These cows are out in the fields. They have a really good life. They're given room to roam. They're not confined into a caged 6x6 cell for their entire lives, but some are, and the idea of incorporating more humane practices, both for how we treat each other and how we treat the rest of the world, will go a long way. And then the final step, we made it, is defragmentation. So defragmentation is this idea that we look through everything through this lens of everything's separate. I'm an individual, you're an individual, I'm separate from you. But if we can defragment our reality, we're looking through this lens of everything is connected. So this idea of seeing from the whole to the part instead of from the part to the whole. The standard way we look at things is from the part to the whole. I look at things through my lens. This is me. And so I'm prioritizing me. But when we start to look at things from the whole to the part, right? It's like this outside third perspective view to myself, right? That I am part of something greater than me, so that the things that happen in my own consciousness, maybe that I don't understand, are actually things that are happening out there that I may or may not be perceiving. right? It could be residing in my subconscious. It could be residing in my body as in a form of pain, and it's something that I'm hiding from, but it's there, this interconnectivity. And if we open ourselves to seeing that interconnectivity and challenging ourselves to understand, no, everything is connected. So anytime I fall into a framework of division or divisiveness for whatever reason, then I'm not seeing it through that proper lens. And that's the ecological spirituality, this idea that it's all about relationship. And Thomas Berry said that the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. Historically, we look at it as a collection of objects. We need to transition into this communion of subjects. And then that's what I think of as wisdom. Yeah, that's seeing it that way, seeing that relationality and the unity. Again, this unity that underlies everything, that underlies our ability to communicate. If we weren't already united, I wouldn't be able to communicate with you, right? It's the idea that I can see you, that we share this same air, we share the same earth, we share the same ozone. All that is underlies that truth that, yeah, we're all connected. And that is that. So I will stop sharing and stop talking and see if you have any questions.
That's wonderful. Um, you know, there are a lot of thoughts that came through, in just listening to you. One, it brought me back to my philosophy class. And because it's a basic understanding of how do we get to our whole sense of values and how do we get to our belief system, and when do we check that? When do we question that? And therefore, when do we question what we do and how we do it? And so that's really a good thing. It makes us aware of the decisions we have made that we've just packed into a box. And you're saying, take a look at that box. And Francis is saying that too. Take a look at that and take a look and see that things are interrelated. They're not discrete, separate items. They're interrelated. I really liked your quote about it's not
Collection of objects.
collection of objects, but it's a constellation of subjects, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have to
Really
say too
great.
that thank you. In all fairness, my philosophy college course was my lowest grade. So, and I realized too that I'm more predisposed, I think, and I'm fortunate for that. And that's why this is easy for me to share. But I realize that for so many people, this is not a place that they want to go, like thought wise, right? And I think you two, you're maybe just like me, a little bit more predisposed to think this way, that we're constantly wanting to learn, constantly wanting to challenge and grow. But some people that can be daunting, and I'm trying to be more empathetic to that understanding, because I get it, especially when things are good. Why change it, right, in your life?
Sure.
Why try to tip over, upset the apple cart, so to speak? But I realized too that is, and really, like in these conversations with Pope Francis came out with something like, oh man, awesome. Like it was kind of affirming, because it's not easy to challenge things all the time, because when you're doing that, you're also challenging yourself all the time. And you're like,
Sure.
even before it's like, what do I have to say that's valuable? But then you can overcome that by saying everybody has something to say that's valuable. Everybody has value. And the more that we listen to one another, and the more that we give each other opportunities to share those experiences, the more we're going to grow, and the more we're going to understand how, yeah, we're all connected.
Oh, that's great. Matt, thank you. Thank you so much for giving us your
Thank you
time
so much.
and for giving us your best thought over your very young life, your best thought of how to re-energize ourselves, and how do we listen for that call of God? What in our language, how do I listen for that call of God to change and to grow and to develop? And that's really our call in our lives. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And that ends our presentation for today. Blessings all.